one of the interesting things about this is that you can't control the spirit. You can't summon it up as though somehow you're in control of it. And this is why waiting is important and patience is important within Quaker spirituality. Quaker unprogrammed worship has been called expectant waiting or waiting worship. And the waiting is to say, we're making ourselves available, but we're not in control.
Welcome to Holistic Circle podcast. My name is Philipp Kobald. We are reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy. And I'm happy to have for a second time here with me, Stuart Masters. Welcome back, Stuart.
Thank you, Philip. It's lovely to be here.
Well, the pleasure is mine. And since I've had a conversation with you, I've been doing a lot of reading up on the Quakers. I'm so sad I have not come across you way back, and I hadn't been in a Catholic boarding school raised by monks. I'd wished I'd been raised by Quakers, maybe liberal Quakers, and I think it would have resonated fantastically with me. But life is the way it is, and I'm still young, so who knows? But most of all, and for all you viewers out there, this year is about exploring the new search in organized religion that so many of us are seeking a community, that so many of us have been all around the world, literally speaking, in terms of religion, been to the retreat to Thailand, been to all of the things that one does, and still have something missing deep inside. There's an unfulfilled corner somewhat. And I'm not talking about the fixes that come with each and every new workshop, with each and every new thing that we discovered that gives us the new injection of spirituality. It's basically integrating it in everyday life, helping us to raise our children and giving us the structure and support that we need these days, looking at the challenges in the world. And with this, basically, I'll start this very basic question with you about this unspecified feeling within that drives one towards spirituality, that nags inside, there must be more. Let's start there, because I think your fellowship knows all about that feeling.
Yes, I mean, in many ways, the earliest Quakers in the 17th century were what you might call seekers. So they sort of didn't like the look of what was available around them and went seeking for a more meaningful spirituality. And in essence, what they felt they found was that they found that within themselves. So there was an experience of turning inwards, finding a place of stillness and stability within them, that it was transformational for them. Now, in one sense, that sounds very individualistic, but it's actually something that's done both by individuals and by whole communities. And so the very beginning of Quaker spirituality is, in a sense, stopping, turning inwards, finding a place deep within us that reveals things to us, that begins to change us, that guides us. And in a sense, everything else flows from that starting point.
It's, of course, not what I can do, and what I want to do is give a list at the end of the year, go to this community and that community and you'll be happy ever after. But in a way, maybe yes, because I know that there are people out there who are seeking, who are trying to find the right place. So what I want to do is I want to map groups or different waves and different paths. Yes, I have to be neutral, and I want to be. Yes, I want to be inclusive as much as I can. But I think I'll give a hint now and then of groups where I think that's a good place to start searching. And because this link, that's so interesting to me, that we are now individualistic. We've read Dalai Lama or Buddha or whatever. We've done all of these things and we created our little God ourselves. But we also understand it's not really working, or something still missing. So finding a group that has the group, but also has enough space to let me a little bit be and breathe, that's like, the magic unicorn. Are you the magic unicorn?
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I mean, obviously, Quakers, like any group, have something to offer, but also there are limitations there. And there's often an interesting tension, isn't there, between the principle and the practice, between what it looks like on paper and the struggles that you have in putting it into practice in real life. But certainly the Quaker tradition has been one that honors the validity and worth of every person, but also recognizes the interconnection of all things, and that we are more than just isolated individuals. We are, to use the Apostle Paul's metaphor, we are all parts of a body, and each part has integrity, but in a sense, it's finding the way in which that body works, because all of the parts are part of it, that's so important. And so there's a balance to be struck within the Quaker way between the validity of the individual, but also the cohesion of the community based on shared experience, and a tradition that you inherit from the past, but also continually changes over time. And that's something that's characteristic of Quakers across their history.
Well, we go to the main conversation theme of the day, to explaining the Quaker spirituality in a more neutral terms to understand the value, where I can let you talk and lean back and sip a bit of my tea. One last question. I had a podcast a couple of days back that really so kind of electrified me. I can't tell you precisely. I'm so sorry, I forgot the name. It's a free evangelic group in the US. There's thousands, one cannot remember. But it's an interesting one. And what really, really shook me in its core was their description about how loving free. It sounded a lot like the Quakers in many ways. And I actually asked her if there's a connection. But it was, what fascinated me so much was that she talks about it, loving acceptance. Nothing can be wrong within the group. And even if you fall in a way, love will bring you back. And she even said she was reaching out to her spirit leader, like, give me guidance, let me help. And he's like, no, no, no. Look inwards. And we are not giving you the frame. You have to go inside. But that feeling of coming home, feeling warmth with others, feeling comfort, I think that's a strong selling point in this bit colder days where families are eroding. And for me, also so interesting that we are commercializing or professionalizing rituals. Like, we have people you can hire for death with the family talking and so forth. And it's booming like crazy. I think it's death downers or whatever it's called. And we have now this midwives thing is booming, where you basically have grandmothers for hire. You can talk about things that you used to talk with your grandmother, and now you have a professionals. So all of this conflicting thing is buzzing about my head. I don't know if you have anything to add to my confusion, but I'd love to get your take from being within such a group, looking in a world that's a bit cold and lonely, I feel these days.
Yeah, I mean, on the one level, Quakers have tended to be suspicious of professionalization, because there's a sense in which this is something that we all have to do together, that in a way, what leads us is beyond any one of us. And so Quakers have tended to be a bit suspicious of fixed hierarchies or fixed leadership structures, and have tended to be trying to do it all together rather than having it done to you. And so there's a balance again to be struck in all of this between recognizing that some people have particular gifts and finding a way to encourage them to use those in a way that doesn't allow authority structures to establish where some people are dominating others. And so, I can see this is an interesting tension across the whole conversation, really, is how do you build community without establishing hierarchy? And that's one of the things that Quakers have been grappling with, in a sense, from the beginning. They've been reasonably successful at it, although even in flat structures, you get informal power structures developing. And so that's something certainly Quakers have found. But the essential shape of the spirituality is something that has to be shared by everyone. And if you believe that it is the spirit or the divine or God or whatever language you want to use that is the leading element in all of this, it means the whole community is focused on something beyond itself, rather than on any one human leader or coordinator. So within Quaker spirituality, we might say there's an inward dimension and a really important outward dimension. So it's not just that this is all inward and spiritual. It has to be absolutely connected to the outward and the physical. And so on the one hand, it might look as though Quakers are very quiet and inward, but actually that's the starting point of transforming us both spiritually and physically. And so the first stage, in a sense, as I've already mentioned, is that turn inwards. And so the way I describe that is it's the practice of being attentive, stopping what we normally do, turn inwards, try and lay down your normal preoccupations, that constant kind of conversation that's going on in your head all the time. Try and quieten that down. Try and find an inward stillness where you can stop and wait and listen. And of course, this is where patience is needed, because to stop and to listen, you won't necessarily hear immediately. And so there's a certain discipline to being willing to sit with the waiting. But what Quakers have found historically is that if you are attentive and if you wait and if you listen, you will begin to get a sense of guidance. So there's being attentive leads to an experience of being guided. And there are many ways of describing that, and friends have used lots of different metaphors. There's a way in which there is a word spoken within us that we can hear. There's a light that shines within us that reveals things to us. There's a spirit within us that can both empower and transform us. And that's what you find, that's what Quakers feel that you find when you stop, when you try to be attentive, when you practice deep listening. Things will be revealed to you. You will hear things, you will see things, you will sense things that you weren't aware of before. And sometimes those can be deeply discomforting things that you have to face up to about yourself and the world. And in a sense, it's important that those things are there because they are the doorway, in a sense, to moving forward and changing. The outward, of course, is trying to be faithful to what you've experienced inwardly. Are you called to do something? In what way should your life change as a result of your inward experiences? And so it's really important for friends or Quakers to try to be adventurous, to try and break out of normal patterns, try to try new things based on their inward experiences. And also it's important for them to be faithful to what they've learned from that inward experience. And so we get the inward experience of being attentive and being guided, leading to a desire to be adventurous and faithful in your life. But those two things, the inward and the outward, are joined together by an absolutely essential discipline called discernment. And so discernment is very much about testing and sorting what you've experienced inwardly and trying to make decisions about what is arising from your normal thoughts, your normal preoccupations, all the things that come to you because of the culture that you've been brought up in, the way you were brought up, the limitations of those things, and what's coming from a deeper place. And so that's a really essential practice, because any group that says we try to act on what we've been told inwardly, what we've learned inwardly, could potentially be quite dangerous. You know, people have said, well, God told me to invade that country and to bomb those people and so on. And so there's a really important testing by that discipline of discernment. So you stop, you're attentive, you have a sense of being guided, you test that very carefully as a practice of discernment, and then you try to put it into action in your life by being adventurous and by being faithful. And that's something that applies to an individual Quaker in their own life, but even more so to the whole community doing that together. And in many ways, Quaker worship is that very practice of the whole community coming together, sitting quietly together, finding that place of stillness and attentiveness so that they can experience revelation, guidance, things that might change their lives. It sounds very simple, but it's actually very challenging.
It sounds everything but simple. The first point of order, basically all podcasters are excluded from the Quaker thing. Sitting quietly is definitely not on our menu. Well,
No, and of course, what comes out of the silence, Philip, is words, is actions. So it's perfectly acceptable for us to do the wordy and the action bit.
the first thing that comes to mind is a quick reflection on what you just said. I don't want to offend anyone. It is just purely for fun and pleasure here to just make a point. If I look at Catholics and look at Quakers, it's a bit like, traditional medicine where I've got a back pain, here, take a pill and problem solved. And natural medicine where it might really talk to you and what's the source of it? Are you under pressure? Do you feeling all of those things? And it's an entirely different, because I've been in natural medicine for quite many years, and I've really been down the line where people say, just give me a pill, go to absolution, say your Hail Marys, put a bit of money to the third world, and the Catholics are all done with it because, I've been through it. So that's, go on and sin no more, or come back next week and pay more. And then we have the Quakers who really like natural medicine and really want you to reflect, to understand. So is this something that's my first interpretation of what you said? But then here comes basically the question that would be leading a big part of this conversation, I hope, is it's a lot, right? For a person with running families, having businesses, having all of these things and spinning around. I've been really wondering, and I want to talk with you about it a bit. Can it be done? Or is it's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a great challenge. And of course, if you were a Quaker in the 17th and the 18th century, there would have been far less distractions in a way. And you would have lived your life in one community, which gave you the opportunity to focus on one thing. And of course, today, if you went to a Quaker community, you will find people, as you will find everywhere else, have busy lives, have fragmented lives. They have a work life, they have a family life, they have social lives, and so on. And busyness is one of the great challenges, because Quaker spirituality requires what traditionally has been called times of retirement. So a deliberate attempt to find time to step back from the busyness and be open and be attentive and be listening, both individually and as community. And in many ways, the depth of Quaker worship and the extent to which it can be transformational for people is dependent to some extent on the willingness of individuals to do that practice in other parts of their lives. And as you've indicated, that's not easy. For example, in Quaker communities today, there are lots of people we call whiffs. Oh, yeah, they're the only Quaker in their family. So that's another dimension to it, that in the past, whole families were Quakers, everybody went to a Quaker meeting. But now there's lots of people who are just the only person in their family who are a Quaker, and they're balancing the commitments to their Quaker community with their commitments to their family. So you're absolutely right to highlight that.
There would be a little bit more hands-on question. First, I also would like to say 17th century life was hard.
It was hard,
physically hard.
Mm-hmm.
Producing food or whatever profession, it was a hard life. And I think a lot that the Quakers had really great answers with the discipline and all of these things, because you needed to be disciplined to produce food year after year for your family. And also the moral stance, families was crucially important, because you can't do it alone, especially farms need families. So a lot what I understand with these Quakers from the time is very much a reflection of the hardship of the time and how to address it. But we moved on. I would very much like if there is an answer from you, because exactly what I talked about is transition, coming with the buzzy head, coming with all the craziness and running into the Quaker meeting. Have you established certain tricks of the trade, certain techniques? Is there a developed procedure to help people with this transition from the crazy buzzy life to the place of stillness? What do the Quakers do?
Well, early Quakers were quite anti-technique in a way. And so you get lots of descriptions of the experience, but you don't necessarily get lots of helpful advice about exactly how to get there. But over time, friends have found that, first of all, as I've said before, trying to set aside some time every day or at periods in your life where you step away from your normal activities and give yourself that space to be still. Because being still and well, let's be honest. I don't know about your experience. You'll never stop your thoughts arising. You will never stop that ongoing dialogue in your head. But you can practice allowing the metaphor really of the volume being turned down, a greater stillness and a greater sense of focus. Now, personally, the way I found to do that, and I've not been very good at spiritual practice, but certainly at the moment what I'm finding is that I need to combine an embodied practice with an inward practice. So my personal daily practice at the moment is to have, first of all, some walking prayer where I will walk and you use a short phrase or whatever to steady my mind. And there's something about the physical activity and the prayer practice that can help you at least stabilize that kind of the monkey mind, I think we often call it, don't we? Certainly within a Buddhist context. And then when I get back, I'm in a better place to sit quietly for a period, having already done that sort of physical work to kind of still my mind. That's what's working for me at the moment. If you talk to different Quakers, they will tell you a whole range of different things that they would do. But the bottom line is that it's not easy. There's no easy fix for it. It comes with practice. Ironically, of course, as we know, as soon as you try to still your mind, you become very conscious of how busy it is. And so we all face that kind of problem. But I think it's a combination of trying to adopt a daily practice, however short, if you can, recognizing that the support within your community for that practice, and that in some senses, coming together to do that together can help with the busyness. If everybody's focused on trying to do the same thing, there's a sense in which there's a stronger, we're back to this idea of interconnection and solidarity and interdependence. There's something that gives some depth there. And it may be that there are some people within your Quaker meeting who've spent the last 80 years with a very deep practice. And those people can almost be the sort of the ballast or the spiritual underpinnings of a meeting that help others, wordlessly mostly, to get to a place of greater stillness. One of the things that Quakers are advised to do is to try to come to meeting for worship with heart and mind prepared. So your point about rushing into the meeting is a real problem, because I think if you suddenly dive into a Quaker meeting for worship without having transitioned from the busyness of your normal life, you're really not giving yourself the best opportunity. And so we're encouraged to try and prepare for a meeting for worship so that when we come together, we've done something to try and bring ourselves into that place of stillness. Now, again, for me at the moment, I find that if I walk to meeting for worship with that greater focus on being prayerful and being focused on what's to come, that puts me in the best possible place to be open and attentive when I come together with others. But yeah, it's a great challenge.
I've been hosting more than 30 years meditation workshops, and it is always the key thing. People, as you said, they're rushing in, and how to bring them to the moment of some stillness or some reflection. And that's why I was interested if you have. But it's so fair enough that you're supposed to already have done the work beforehand and come with a certain conscious. That's, of course, a luxury. What we meditation guys don't have. Those people come, but the way they come. Yeah. That's why some communities start with singing, or as you said, something physical or breathing or whatever. It's just something physical. Your walking is exactly a perfect example of just to come from the mind to the body, and then it's easier to come back to the mind.
Yeah, and certainly some Quaker communities will try to do that. They will try and have some sort of activity. Not very often, but there are examples of, as you say, singing can be a good way. I know at my meeting there's been some opportunities during the summer, for example, for people to do yoga and Tai Chi outside the meeting in the sort of hour leading up to, for those who want to do that. So I can see that I can see that connection. Quakers have tended to be rather, certainly after the first generation, not very embodied in their spirituality, other than in the transformed life. That's the important thing, is that the embodiment in Quaker spirituality is the way in which you put into practice in a physical way something in your life that reflects what you've experienced. But I think there's a growing recognition of the way in which the embodiment, the outward physical embodiment and the inward spiritual state are intimately interconnected. I do remember that the one time when a practice had the biggest impact on me in terms of steadying my mind was I was involved in a course at Woodbrook, which was a Quaker study centre in Birmingham. And we did some walking meditation based on the practice of Thich Nhat Hanh. And we all walked very slowly around the garden for half an hour or so. And everybody sat down in the meeting room afterwards in a completely different state of mind and being, And that convinced me of the importance of connecting the physical and the embodied with the inward and the spiritual.
If you allow us to now come, it's like halfway through the podcast. So let's dive to the deep end before we focus on the outward world and how we also focus on modern liberals and open for people who maybe not 100% Quakers leaning towards. So, but let's spend a couple of minutes on the main thing that fascinates me when you say the Holy Spirit itself. When the stillness happens, when you're sitting after you've done the preparation and you're waiting for this message, for this feeling, whatever comes to mind, whatever you want to share about this experience, because this is something that, also going back to the podcast I had a couple of days ago and the conversation I had with you last time and other conversations, it's pretty impressive, the consequences that arise once gets in contact with the spirits, gets so-called a message, gets a so-called job to do from the spirit itself, and then starting to integrate it. We will talk about later the integration. But it is a very strong experience that I'd say a lot of other religions, like in my Catholic world, I've been an altar boy many years and I've been up and down the square and everything. But the spirit, I've come across one or two slappings from the priest as a mandatory thing. But the spirit itself, I was not present at that time so often. So I'd very much like to get your...
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting your experience of the Catholic upbringing. I mean, in some ways, Quaker spirituality, you could say it's got a Catholic aspect to it, but without all the hierarchy and all of the kind of authority structures. So, I think, to be fair to the Catholic tradition, you would find the kind of thing we're talking about within a contemplative monastic sort of context, in a way. In a way, the only other groups that I can think of in a Christian context, in terms of the roots of Quakerism, that would do anything like a Quaker meeting for worship would probably be groups of contemplatives sitting in silence together doing contemplative prayer. So there is that connection as well. One of the interesting things about this is that you can't control the spirit. You can't summon it up as though somehow you're in control of it. And this is why waiting is important and patience is important within Quaker spirituality. Quaker unprogrammed worship has been called expectant waiting or waiting worship. And the waiting is to say, we're making ourselves available, but we're not in control. And so holding that place of stillness, holding that place of deep listening is making yourself available. And although you can't control the spirit, should the spirit begin to do something, you need to be ready and sensitive to it and ready to respond. And people experience that in all sorts of ways. Early Quakers, it was like a spiritual storm. We talked last time about them being very Pentecostal, very, very spiritually empowered and expressive and so on. For most Quakers across history, it's been much more the still small voice, the quiet nudge, the sense of something arising rather than, the earthquake and people being thrown to the floor and so on. And so it's a fairly subtle thing. But as you indicate, one of the important things is being ready to respond should you feel within you, the Spirit is calling you to do something. Now, within a Quaker meeting for worship, the most obvious thing is that people feel they're given a message that others need to hear. So what Quakers often call spoken ministry or vocal ministry. And of course, anyone within the gathering may feel that is arising within them. And there's no rules or limitations on who can or can't speak. What matters is trying to be faithful to what you feel you're being called to do. And so, again, discernment is important here. I'm sitting in a meeting for worship. I feel that I ought to be saying something because that's bubbling up within me. But I have to ask myself, where's that coming from? Is it coming from my normal preoccupations, my normal kind of interests and so on? Or is it coming from a deeper place? Is it coming from somewhere beyond me? However I might understand it. And then the second question is this a message that's just for me? Or is it something actually that others need to hear? And so there's a little bit of a testing that needs to go on. Of course, if you test too vigorously, you'll never stand up and speak and the time's gone and you'll miss your opportunity. And that there's a balance to be struck between being too inclined to speak too quickly without proper discernment and being too discerning or too unwilling to speak and not being faithful to what you called to do. Because a short piece of spoken ministry can have a really major impact on the experience of the depth of the worship. I've experienced this myself. I was in a meeting for worship. Somebody said a few words and I can't remember what they said. All I remember is this sense of us suddenly feeling as though we'd gone to a much deeper place, a place where we would want to stay if we could, that we wouldn't want to end the worship because we were in this. It's almost like being pulled into heaven in a way. Do you know what I mean? However you might understand that. It's a different level of existence, a different level of experience. And it doesn't happen very often, but Quakers historically have called that a gathered meeting or a covered meeting. It's when the spiritual experience goes to a deep level and almost makes the people present feel that the physical distinctions between them have melted away and somehow they are one. And that's something that Quakers have experienced. But it's not about having a spiritual high for the sake of it. What matters is this experience leading you towards peaceableness, justice, compassion, concern for others? And what does that mean for how you live your life, which of course is something we're going to speak about later.
Just a very quick micro question. Do you see with the communities that you're involved in, do you see that maybe younger generations are less capable because of all the social media and all of this? Do you see a certain decline of being able to find that stillness, or is your community still a piece of heaven where this has not spilled over yet?
I mean, I think there's some interesting challenges here. I think I would be reluctant to generalize about people who are younger than me. I think there is great diversity there. And I think there are people who recognize, to be honest with you, there's plenty of older people who are on social media all the time and completely caught up with that as well. So I don't think it's necessarily a generational thing. Although it'll be interesting to see how things change in the coming years. There may well be, I think it's an interesting issue, isn't it? We seem to be moving into a period of deep crisis, humanity, both in terms of militarism and the threat of war, ecological destruction, major upheavals within society and so on. And those tend to be the sorts of circumstances where I think the work of the spirit seems to accelerate and new things happen as a result of that. And I think it'll be very interesting to see whether this begins to become visible for us in the time we're moving into at the moment. Recognizing, for example, for Quakers, that it was a period of complete social breakdown and turmoil that it allowed the movement to emerge in the first place. Having said that, and trying to be realistic about us as humans, I do feel sometimes that the busyness of our lives and maybe the dying out of some of those older, sort of spiritually weighty kind of people who hold all things together can sometimes make a Quaker community feel a little bit spiritually thin. And things can become a little bit superficial. And of course, because it depends on all of us taking seriously the practice, it is quite easy for all of us to become a bit complacent, to not take the discipline seriously, to find it hard to fit it into our daily lives. And so, I can see that, and I think, it is a challenge within Quaker meetings. Are we simply having a quiet time to think our normal thoughts, or are we really surrendering ourselves and being completely open? I think that's a really challenging issue.
You beautifully answered, because it's exactly why I asked the question, because I have the same hunch that all of the things that you just said is going to create, I think before all of it happens that you just mentioned, AI is going to happen so quick and so intensively. So it's going to be even before climate change, which may need another 20, 30 years before the waters are high. But AI is going to happen right now. And it's clear as daylight, there's going to be a strong counter movement. People will be going totally analog. People will be going totally, it will be maybe a small, maybe 10% of the population. And I think movements like yours, like the Quakers and others, will be a go-to place, I guess, if done right. If your fellowship does right and sees the opportunity at the moment, I'm 100% with you that your movement is a great place in turmoil times to bring certain inner stability and peace and community. So that's one of the reasons I invited you back, and it's one of the reasons I keep coming back to you, because I think you could be one of these places where people will find, if done right, it's how your community steps up to these challenges. But it definitely could be a place where a lot of people can find peace and comfort in a world gone mad.
So no, I think you're right. I think what matters is being serious about the discipline, not as a rigid set of rules, but simply that, in a sense, a little bit like physical, no pain, no gain. You've got to take your discipline seriously if you want to reap the benefits. And so, but it's an interesting discipline, because you can't force yourself to surrender, because by forcing, you're asserting your own will. And so we're back into those interesting, tricky kind of paradoxes that you get with any kind of spirituality that's about surrendering or laying down your normal thoughts, is that the more you try to do it, the more you're not doing it. But I think taking that discipline seriously is what really matters, regardless of differences of belief and language and so on. I surrender. Am I prepared to really deeply listen? Am I genuinely open to be surprised at what might be revealed to me? And once I've done my discernment, can I find the courage and the empowerment to make my life look different, live in a different way? And I think you're right. Unless there's a fundamental spiritual transformation of the human species, we're in deep trouble, and wherever that might come from.
A couple of reasons we don't have the time to go into, but that's an interesting conversation on itself, right? I'm not going into it because I'll start talking, I go crazy here. But paradox, you're absolutely right. And I think it will be interesting. I don't know much about the Quakers and so forth to have here a solid position, but I guess looking on technicalities and ways to modernize exactly the discipline, or framing it, or bringing the framework that stillness might be hard to achieve on the first goal, or certain elements of it, but bringing it into modern facing in a way that leads people towards will be one of the crucial elements I'm suspicious about. So now I ask the funny question, because it's me, it's my podcast, so we have to ask something out of the box. And is it already on the market and I just don't know it? But is there a way to transform all of this into an app, so to say? Is the become the Quaker app in a certain way, where the new generation who, want the peace and quiet from the mobile phone uses the mobile phone to be part of a Quaker meeting? Could this be, or otherwise, do you think a Quaker meeting in its fullest extent could happen online? What is your position on that?
Well, it does in many ways. I mean, what happened when the COVID... Well, Quakers have been experimenting with online worship for some time. And then when COVID happened and everything shut down, that significantly expanded. And so certainly in Britain, Brook, which is the education organisation that I worked for up until recently, I still do stuff for them. They run 11 different meetings for worship online every week. And so there are now Quaker communities developing that are purely online rather than face-to-face. Of course, this is a bit controversial amongst friends, because some friends will argue you need the physical fellowship, you need to be together physically. And others will say, no, actually, the fundamental point about Quaker worship is that it can be done anywhere. And it's about how the Spirit is working amongst people, whether they are sitting together in a room or whether they're actually sitting in front of their computer together in a virtual space. And so in some ways, Quaker spirituality works quite well in that sort of context. I'm a little bit cautious about Quakerism as an app, primarily because of that communal, individual kind of dynamic, really. But certainly there are online resources that Quakers create. There's quite a lot of Quaker-based podcasts, for example, and things like that. And in Britain, the Britain Yearly Meeting, which is the organisation of Quakers in Britain, is at the moment reviewing what we call the Book of Discipline. So it's the book that tells you how we do things, along with lots of writings from Quakers over the years that give a flavour of what Quakers are about. And I think if you've not seen a Book of Discipline, you could Google Quaker Faith and Practice online, and you could have a look at it online, and you can look at all the various themes that are in it, and lots of different Quaker writings across the years. But we're reviewing that Book of Discipline at the moment, and I think the people who are involved in leading that are exploring lots of different ways of making it available in future. It's tended to be a physical book in the past that now is just available online, but it could be available in all sorts of different ways. And I think this idea that we find accessible ways of helping people to explore the practices is a very important one. I mean, obviously, I've been a Quaker teacher for the best part of 20 years. And so I've done a lot of this work face-to-face with Quakers in meetings and also in online courses. But finding new ways of doing it. I mean, obviously, I've got a book as well that was published at the end of last year, which the central chapters are very much about what we've been talking about today, that sort of shape of Quaker spirituality, the inward, the testing and the outward. And so that's a rather old-fashioned way of doing it, isn't it? Forcing people to read a book. But that's just me giving it a plug. So the Quaker Faith, Friends of Love and Truth.
Old-fashioned and super modern in the same way. But now it's snippets. Now it's maybe just some one or two lines, but that's exactly what's reaching out in those modern communities for kids or teenagers. And I'm sure that you will be good at that, because just in the transition will be interesting. But I'm sure if you have such an active community, yourself wrote stuff, so you also contributed to the wide Quaker literature. But we have 15 minutes left, so I will not try to make it quick. Now, let's go what I think might be the stuff that the young and next generation will be the easiest to hook on, the implementation into life. Because this is where people, I know, and that will be part of the question. A lot of people now want guidance. They're overrun with decision making. Can I buy these sneakers? Are they made in India? Were the children involved? is the leather ecologically, and and the soil is with rubber, with it's just half an hour just philosophizing if I can buy the sneakers, yes or no. And things have gotten rather complicated with the food and everything. If I just go through it in my mind, all the different things, is it good or not good, appropriate, not appropriate? We're going crazy on daily basis. And now you're putting more questions on top of it from the Quaker perspective, asking yourself and integrating it. So I guess a lot of people would want very strict and simple rules, like, 10 things to make you a good Quaker, then you just go through the day. And having one more thing that I need to reflect on, having one more thing I need to ask my inner voice. I wonder when I run on total exhaustion so again, looking at the next generation, we're really looking now into teenagers.
Yeah.
Where you see this conflict.
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that Quakers have tended not to have absolutely strict, well, they did in the past, but for quite a long time, Quakers don't have a spirituality that says you have to do this, that, or the other in order to be a Quaker. But the Book of Discipline that I was talking about earlier includes within it a short section called Advices and Queries. And those are also available free as little red booklets. And what Advices and Queries do is they give a bit of advice from the Quaker heritage about what Quakers have found to be true over time. But then they also offer a query, and queries are quite good at not telling you what to do, but prompting a question that allows you to think more deeply about something. And so there will be queries about, think carefully about how you live your life and where you get your entertainment and what you buy and all things like that. So that's one way of thinking about it. The other thing to say is that by its nature, sorry, go on.
Can I stop you? I'm so sorry, but I really need to ask you this, because look at the numbers with now 16, 17-year-old, how much they ask all of these decisions they're supposed to make. They're going out of ChatGPT and asking for advice. They're totally crazy advice hungry because they are already overloaded, as I just talked about the sneakers. So they ask ChatGPT, is it okay to buy these sneakers? Or is it okay this? It's unbelievable how high are the numbers already with these teens asking for life advice because they're just overrun with complex decisions. So sorry to stop you here.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And of course, what Quaker practice and spirituality will say is you will get clarity about what you should do when you submit yourself to that practice of stopping, turning inwards, listening, seeing what you find there, trying to discern what it's calling you to do, and then trying to find a way of putting that into practice. So I suppose what the Quaker tradition would say is that all of those things are really important, but if you get lost in the detail of the decisions, perhaps you need to set those things aside and go back to fundamentals, listen, see what you're guided to do, be part of a community that's doing that together. Because you can't do everything, you can't cope with everything. What matters is, what am I called to do in this place and this time? I'm one individual person. I don't control the world. I don't understand everything. But there may be something that's really important that I, as an individual, or my community, is called to do. And so it may be actually that cutting through all of that confusion to the real heart of the thing that you particularly are called to do in this place and time. And hopefully that does arise from the sort of discipline and practice that I was outlining earlier.
But you would be, from your personal, you're not speaking for the world of Quakers, but from talking to you directly, Stuart, you would think that you sitting down and programming an LLM model with your view of Quakers, or putting thousands of different Quakers and even trying to call on the spirit and putting it in there. So future generation of teens who want to follow the Quakers just ask the model, would that be something that absolutely a no-go 100% against your structures of beliefs? Where would you stand on such a thought process?
Well, I mean, first of all, when Quakers put into practice faithfully what they've experienced inwardly, Quakers have called that their witness or their testimony. Now, if you asked a Quaker today what it is that they value about the Quaker faith, often people will talk about the testimonies. Now, there is a little bit of a problem with this because Quaker spirituality doesn't say you've got to follow particular rules and regulations, but it does have a set of testimonies or a testimony that has a certain shape to it. So rejecting violence is a really significant aspect of Quaker testimony across time, but it's not a rule. It's not an absolute and fixed rule. What matters is you do what the Spirit has called you to do. And I think Quakers would say, if you've done your spirituality right, and if you're moving through the guidance of the Spirit, you will be moved away from violence towards a more peaceable life. But it is a journey rather than an absolute rule and regulation. Quakers have also emphasised the need to live simply. I'm not sure how true they've been to that. But what Quakers have tended to mean by simplicity is your life focused on the most important things, or is it simply distracted and overly busy? A lot of the stuff we've been talking about today. Are you being truthful and do you have integrity? Are you living by what you say? So is the consistency between what you say your values are and how you're living them? So these are some of the things that are definitely there. But what it would take to get you booted out of the Quaker community is an interesting question. If people apply for membership, it's not an absolute rule that they have to be a pacifist. What they do need to recognise is that Quakers as a community have been a peaceable people across history, and that is a key element of the Quaker tradition. But again, it's about moving in the right direction, allowing the Spirit to guide you towards those things, rather than a rule that allows you to either be in or out. Having said that, there will be some things that seem to be bringing the Quaker community into disrepute. So if somebody was guilty of persistent criminal activity, particularly maybe stealing for people, defrauding people or whatever, that might be the kind of thing that might lead to you being excluded from the community. But as I say, there's no absolute rules in all of this. There's a tradition that has had a particular shape to it that you would expect Quakers to be aligning themselves with. But it's a process. It's about process. It's about relationship. It's about moving. It's not about absolute ins or outs and absolute rules.
Well, I phrase my question one more time, more precise. There is an interesting thing happening right while it's giving your brain up to some super entity, and soon LML models will be smarter than an individual person. And they say the end of next year, it'll be smarter as the combined brain capacity of humanity. So by the end of this year, smarter than the smartest person. By the end of next year, smarter than the combined knowledge, which we basically would almost call God by the end of the day. It would have the absolute wisdom, so to say. And then we have Quakers listening to you over and over again. It seems to be like you are, the master of your mind. You have to do this process of listening, of clearing yourself, of being so I don't have the right English terms for it, but so, in charge of yourself, for giving up your mind, giving up your decision making, giving up your moral questioning, giving up your search seems to me like the total contrapoint. So could that be the reason why I think Quakers could be one of the havens of the future to come? Because you can't be a Quaker and let a machine think for you. Is this something I'm on the right track?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I would say that we're back into paradox, aren't we, Philip?
Yeah.
This is about giving up yourself rather than being in control of yourself. And so of course, it depends on what it is that you think you're listening to. Now, amongst liberal Quakers today, it is a pluralist community, and there are many different understandings about what it is that people are listening to in meeting for worship. And so there is a non-theist element within modern Quakerism that sees God as a social construct and not a real thing, and there are people who are more influenced by a Buddhist perspective, which of course is essentially a non-theist tradition, or at least God doesn't have an important place within it. And so there's lots of different understandings about where this comes from. If you looked at traditional Quaker spirituality as it emerged in the 17th century, back to the conversation we had in our first podcast, what Quakers were saying was, God or Christ is literally available to you within your conscience, within yourself, and you need to lay down your normal human will and allow Christ to rule within you and live through you. So this is where there's an interesting paradox. There's a need to follow a discipline, but that discipline is about giving up your own control and allowing the power of love and truth to become dominant within you and to live through you. Now, of course, you might say, well, people are just deluding themselves. They're simply asserting their own individual will. And of course, that's always a problem. But at the heart of spirituality is give up the limitations of your own human self and allow this bigger, all-encompassing spirit to be the thing that guides and lives through you. And, there is certain characteristics to that spirit that Quakers have felt is essential, that we've talked about, that it is non-violent, that it is loving and compassionate, that it's truthful and it has integrity. And it recognises the value of all creatures and all living things, and recognises the interconnection and interdependence of those things. That's the essence of it, I think. But we can't escape the paradox. Is it me being in control, or is it me giving up and allowing something else to be in control? Am I deluding myself, or am I actually tapping into something that's more true than my separateness and my sense of fragmentation and so on?
Interesting. Thank you, first of all. But it's interesting that I don't see the conflict. I'm much more calm about this because I make my free will choice to give up. But it's my choice to submit myself to the higher spirit. And it's part of meditation practice to come to that point where you let go of all wantings and let the spirit guide you. So that's exactly what it is. But I've made this choice and it took me years and years and years. And I can always revoke it. I can always, make mistakes on the way. And I'm in the driver's seat of letting somebody else drive me.
I think that's a really important point. And of course, because Quakers are a peaceable people, it's important to recognize that there's no coercion here. There can't be coercion. It has to be I have to voluntarily decide to surrender myself. Yep. I can't be forced to do it. World peace can't come through physically trying to kill everybody to make it. It can only come through stopping doing those things. And so, yes, I can. It's a paradox, but it's also something that makes sense. And I'm with you on that. Though historically, Quakers have been a little bit suspect about free will, but that's because of the religious context that they emerged from. And most Quakers wouldn't have a problem with that today.
Thank you so much that you make the time for a paradox conversation. That's already is such a great testament of that you have the flexibility within. If I would have, I was a couple of times today critical on the Catholic, but I come from that past. I've been to this world, and I say all of this with love because I know how much good they do, and I know all of it. But I know that you could have, and I had with Catholic priests conversations that were open and respectful. But I have to tell you that I see that there is a certain underlying culture within your faith that opens such a conversations, and that's becoming also less normal. We can talk and that we can reflect. And maybe you're right that we might now come into a time where we'll have to deal with a lot of paradox things coming our way, and we need to prepare ourselves to just jump into it and not necessarily find find the final point. Thank you so much, Stuart. It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. It's been great to spend time with you.